But I always remember that when you were at school, if you were going to go and do your work outside in the field, it was always more fun than sat in the classroom.
Always, yeah.
We wanted to do it where it was like the going outside part, where it was exciting. So this is a beautiful eagle.
Yeah.
Her name is this. I got her from there. She's a bit of a handful, but she flies fantastically well. And let's have a little look at what she's capable of doing. And it becomes that where you actually feel like you're a bit more involved and you know the individual rather than the species and the info getting drilled into you. And the nice thing with the Highland is it's about the smallest we can work in for arena size. I think it's a 40 by 30 arena, and that's really on our boundary for getting eagles out and back in safely. That's as small as we can go. But it does mean that you can pretty much like you're only meters away from your audience and your public, so you really get a good interaction and a feel from it. But also, in between doing the event, we do a static display where the public can come across, have a chat, have a look at the birds and so on. I don't do any handling with my eagles. I never have done. I don't like it. I think the eagle's very comfortable with me, Rebecca, our couple of dogs that are always around them, and the safe environment. We set up a big marquee with a solid backdrop, and that's their place. And they go in the arena and they do their thing, and then they come back to their place.
So the first year we were there, I lost track of what year it is even. That's terrible. 2018 we were there, and we went and we built a rowing boat over the course of the weekend and launched it live on Landwood, which was quite good.
Oh, I saw a clip of that just the
Sunday.
other day, actually.
Yeah.
They showed it again, didn't they? Yes,
Yeah. All my neighbours were like, I'll show you on the telly, son. I was like, yeah. And then last year we were there. But the first year there wasn't much happening on the pond aside from us launching a boat, and it always seemed like a shame. So last year we also had a fleet of canoes, and we spent all week, the whole 4 days, sending kids out in canoes onto the pond, which was great fun and really quite entertaining.
Oh, brilliant. That's actually led me into my next question, which was really to kind of find out from you what the reception was. You know, you were obviously seeing and demonstrating to many, many members of the public. How were people receiving it? What was their interest like?
Pretty good interest, yeah. I mean, people were quite into it. So last year we were building a canoe, we had people on the water, and we also had some like little demo stuff that kids could play with. And so we just had like piles of wood shavings and folks shrieking on the water and chatting to old boys about details of boat building. And it was just great, yeah, it's really positive. You get some really nice feedback and some really nice chat.
And probably much as other people at the Highland Show do, kind of igniting interest in people that they perhaps didn't even know they had, coming along and seeing something that they probably weren't expecting to see at the Highland Show, and actually kind of learning much more about what goes on in the parts of Scotland that they don't necessarily routinely visit. Yeah,
I think that's it. I think there's such a range of stuff at the Highland Show that even if you're... Like, I've been to the Highland Show 6 or 7 times maybe now, and every time I find things that I wasn't expecting to see. You know, it's such a vast show, and there's such a range of stuff that I think we fit into that quite well, of people come expecting the tractors and the cattle, and then come around a corner and find some folk building a boat in a tent, and that's quite interesting.
The first year, I think I was just mostly, it was me, and I was doing felting. And then the second year, we were washing fleece, and then we were dyeing it outdoors over fires. And then we were felting it, and we were spinning it, and we were knitting with it, and also weaving. So we had the whole cycle. That was the first time we did the whole thing, and that went really well. That was great fun, and people could get involved and learn about each part of it.
You go to displays and you show people the tradition that you have learned since the age of 15, but then when you're out doing a bird control, you're working in very modern environments and helping modern day businesses to continue, which I think is fascinating. And how do you see that kind of contrast between traditional and modern?
I look at it like this: if you go to the airport and there's a Springer Spaniel sniffing at bags to detect people carrying drugs or anything along those lines, that's the application of an animal that was bred originally for another purpose being used to help people and to create a safe environment and so on. Now, for what I do, I use, often nowadays we use hybrids, but falcons such as Lanners and peregrine falcons and things like that, to basically go into an industrial, quite often an urban environment or a busy area, and I use that animal's ability to scare another animal in favour of me. So if I have a flock of seagulls on the runway, I can let go of that peregrine falcon, and them seagulls will naturally move away from that peregrine falcon as they recognise that as a predator that they've learn and evolve to evade. The application of falconry to a modern situation is brilliant for me because that allows me to do it. It's an old art form that's evolved and been took to another level.
Gosh, I'm really inspired. I think what you do is amazing. And how did you get involved? How did you learn these skills in the first place?
I started falconry at 15-year-old and I fell into it. I was always interested in my birds and my wildlife and all the country pursuits, hunting, shooting, fishing, everything as a young lad growing up in the North Yorkshire Dales. I was expelled at 15-year-old and I left home shortly after. And I went to work for a guy who had a falconry centre. And to be honest with you, that was really what turned my whole situation around for me. It gave me an opportunity to work with birds of prey and it just instantly drilled home with me. Just something clicked and went home with me. So I set up on my own. I had a little small van. I borrowed some money off my mother at the time and got a few birds gathered up of friends and people that I knew, and set up a little display team and went around doing mainly secondary schools and some colleges. Got a little bit of TV and filming work where I would put tawny owls into programmes and barn owls into Heartbeat, and some birds were on Emmerdale and similar. And then this grew it slowly over the years to have more eagles, more vultures, more bird control measures, that sort of stuff. And it really developed into that, really, I suppose.
I mean, what we do at the show, we're building boats really quickly, and it's not really traditional craft. We're using a lot of glues and plywood and stuff. But still, there's a sense of like a heritage to it that people really value. And that idea of just being able to knock something up is quite exciting. People always think of boat building as being this slow, dramatic thing. I quite carefully try and move away from being thought of as like a traditional or heritage craft as boat building, because I think it puts it in a certain in a world where we're filled with old guys with white beards talking about knots around a pint of cider, which is, a nice world, and I like that. But I really want boat building, and a part of the folk school was always to make boat building much more accessible and much more open to people. And so we try and simplify the language a lot and talk a lot about how it's not this rarefied, magnificent thing. It's a great thing, but it's also something that anyone can do, and it's really approachable. And so a lot of what we try to do is to democratise that. Yeah,
that's a really interesting point, actually, because it is about the modernisation. You're keeping something alive that once was a traditional skill, but you're modernising it and using modern tools, and you're bringing it into the 21st century and allowing people who perhaps wouldn't ordinarily get access to doing crafts like that to have the opportunity to learn something.
And just to feel like it could be for them rather than being for rich old folk, there's nothing wrong with rich old folk, but they are the demographic that traditionally engage in wooden boat world.
Yes.
One of my bugbears, I don't know if I should say this on a podcast, but why not? Maybe I should, is that there's an organisation called the Heritage Craft Association, which is a great organisation. They do some great work. But they are based down in London, and it is an overwhelmingly white middle-class organisation of people who exalt over how to make a ladder traditionally out of split staves of wood. And yes, sure, making a ladder in a traditional manner is nice as a heritage skill, but it's not a useful heritage skill anymore because you can buy a ladder. The only reason our boats are still useful and important is that the boats that we build are better than other boats. We build a sea kayak which weighs less and performs better than almost any other sea kayak you can buy. If you spend £8,000 on a carbon fibre sea kayak, it'll be better. But otherwise, our boats are better because wood is an amazing material and it's practical and useful. Because if you're relying on heritage crafts being saved for their own sake, then you need to find somebody who really cares about exactly which way the staves were split when you made your oak weave basket or whatever. And ultimately, it doesn't matter. You've just got to make a nice basket. So there is that tension there always. We live in that tension, I guess.
One of the things we're talking about in this podcast episode is about trying not to lose these traditional crafts and trying to pass them on. And, my grandma taught me how to knit. I'm not nearly as good and will never be as good as she was, but I have the basic skill. But actually, darning has kind of left our family. My mum, I think, still darns socks, but I certainly don't. And so in a sense, some of these things are carrying on and some are being lost. But I suppose why do you think it's important in a broader sense, beyond just the Highland Show, that people do maintain a knowledge and a skill set in some of these traditional crafts?
Today's world, we're very much a throwaway society and not much is made to last. And I think if you don't give children the skills to be able to mend a hole in their jumper or even, their leggings, they just will chuck them in the bin. Whereas, in fact, they could just sew it up or darn it and it's going to last a lot longer. And I think just also making things for yourself gives you a huge amount of satisfaction. A lot of people who come on our courses, our week-long courses, a lot of them are fairly stressed when they arrive, and focusing in on doing craft for a week, they go back. Some of them go back in tears because they've released so much and relaxed so much that they can't believe that, that the craft and being outdoors and has allowed to do that. But I think it's focusing on something other than what's in your head, and spinning or sewing or weaving or felting allows you to do all of that because you're just focusing on what you're doing. So it's so good for your mental health.
If you live in inner city, Glasgow or Edinburgh, or if you're London or Manchester, and you go to a country-themed event and you actually see somebody who has a ferret and he tells you, he puts it on a rabbit, or rabbit jumps into a net and he sells that and makes a living from it. It must be incredible to realise that actually goes on. It's a great way of just discovering these things out there, and if somebody lets go of a falcon or an eagle and it flies on the sky and comes back to them willingly, admittedly there's a reward factor because there's no domestication, but it's no different to a dog coming back and getting a pat on the head, a reward in a different way.
Why do you think it's important for skills and crafts such as yours to be kept alive in Scotland?
Not just Scotland, everywhere. I think skills and crafts need to be kept alive, don't they? Really, obviously this is a predominantly Scottish audience when we're at the Highland Show, but I know people that travel from the southwest of England to go to the Highland Show because they just love the whole show environment. And every agricultural show is slightly different, but the Highland is a very special one for us. And I think really all sort of these traditional crafts and stuff, they weren't always crafts, were they? 50, 60, 100 years ago, this is how people lived.
The thing that's interesting with boats is, I guess, break quite a few of these crafts, but boats were such the essential possessions of people who lived on the coast. Nowadays, if you live in the live in rural Scotland, you probably can't get away without a car. In previous ages, you probably couldn't get away without a boat. All the rural places that people live on the west coast especially, they seem like they're in the middle of nowhere, but if you draw lines on the sea, they're right next to each other. Boats are so integral to the way we used to live in Scotland. We've kind of lost sight of that because we've put roads on top of the land. But if you needed a boat, you built a boat, or you had your neighbour build you a boat. And so they were everywhere. And the sense of need and the way you acquired them was very democratic. And I really like that idea. And I like that it's accessible to everybody. And then when we work with communities that have never built anything really. Like we work with lots of people who've never picked up tools and never had the opportunities to pick up tools, and no one's ever trusted them. We've worked with like 8, 9, 10-year-olds who've never been trusted to do anything, and we'll give them a power drill and tell them to start drilling holes and things.
Wow.
And their eyes light up. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe you let me do this. I'm like, yeah, it's fine, just go for it. And you watch over their shoulders so it is actually safe, but they feel that sense of empowerment from having a chance to do that.
Yes, absolutely.
We mentioned before about the use of gun dogs and the use of ferrets and all these different things. I have a friend who was a fantastic rabbit catcher, ferreter, but he's been using the ferrets to take cables under roads by getting them to go through pipes, taking ropes and pulling cables through, and all sorts of amazing little modern applications. You think, that's so simple, and we would lose a lot more, and we're going to lose a lot more unless there's somewhere people can go and actually see this firsthand. Speak to the guy, have a chat with a lassie. You don't have anyone there that's not passionate and not skilled in what they do. That's a premier event. It has the best of the best there, and you're going to see some fantastic stuff. So if you want to learn a little bit more about wild game, you want to learn about cooking, catching, providing for yourself, you want to understand falconry, or you just have an interest in birds of prey or conservation, these places are great to go and talk to people that are just doing it every single day. And that's what I think the best thing about an event like that is.
One thing we do at the Royal Highland Show that I really love and that I feel really strongly about is that the canoeing sessions and all the things we do are totally free. And when kids show up and they want to come out on a canoe, they always ask how much it is. And when we tell them that it's free, they can't believe it. They're like, what? It's free?
Yeah.
Just that sense that you could just have something and someone could just give you a thing and it could just be free because it's fun.
Yes.
That's actually quite rare.
Yeah.
And I think that's the sort of thing that we want to like hold on to as much as possible.
Definitely. So, Martin, we've heard